Last weekend, a man opened fire in a Dallas hospital, killing 2 nurses. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice granted 30-year-old Nestor Hernandez permission to be with his girlfriend for their baby's delivery on Saturday morning. He was on parole for aggravated robbery and wearing an ankle monitor. But the hospital chief says no one notified the hospital that Hernandez was going to be there. Joining us to talk about this is Jack Frazee from the Texas Nurses Association. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Jack, what went through your mind when you heard about these 2 nurses who were killed at work, and how could this have been prevented? Could it have been prevented?
Well, the first thing is just a sense of heaviness and empathy for the family and friends that have lost their loved one. I know there's going to be a lot of grief and mourning, but then there's also just kind of a sense of urgency. We have some legislation we've been working on for the past several sessions, and the legislature, I think, has a role to play in passing that legislation and trying to prevent these things from happening in the future. In terms of keeping this from happening, there are things that the state can do, very tangible steps that we can take. And there's legislation that's been proposed for the past several sessions that I think would address these kinds of issues.
Let's talk about those proposals and how would they work?
Sure. So the main legislation that's been moving through is a workplace violence prevention bill. It basically would require healthcare facilities to set policies and plans of action to avoid these kinds of incidents in the first place. They would rely on things like training for de-escalation training, but then also would have a number of protections for healthcare workers so that they can report these kinds of incidents and make sure that they get assistance from law enforcement.
In this particular situation where the 2 nurses were killed in Dallas, what went wrong? Where was the disconnect? What could have been done differently?
Well, it's hard to say. We're still gathering a lot of information about this particular incident, so I don't want to get out ahead of gathering the facts on that. But, you know, there's a lot of things that hospitals are trying to do to avoid these kinds of incidents, and I'm sure there's things that law enforcement are looking at to think about, you know, whether we're having issues releasing offenders that shouldn't be out on the street.
When it comes to violence in hospitals, how common is this?
It's unfortunately very common. Healthcare workers are about 4 times more likely than any other professional to be assaulted in the workplace. And that's even given the fact that these things are often underreported. There was research that was conducted by the Texas Center for Nursing Workforce Studies that came out in 2016. And the nurses that were surveyed as part of that study, only 40% of them had reported the most recent incident of assault that they were subjected to. So it is a very common thing, and unfortunately there's kind of a perception that that's just part of working in healthcare. And so one thing that I think we need to do is change that culture of just kind of expecting that to be part of the job. And part of how we do that is make sure that healthcare professionals feel supported and protected when they make these kinds of reports, and that there won't be any kind of retaliation against them in the workplace.
All right. Jack Frazee with the Texas Nurses Association. Thank you so much for sharing your time and perspective with us tonight.
Thank you.